good to go.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. This is a brilliant place. I love being here, and it's even nicer inside. I feel like it should be a barbecue, that's the only thing, but apart from that. So I was going to talk to you a little bit about some of the journeys that I've done. And so we've got this thing, let's see if it works. I was going to start with a bit of Marx. It's always good to start with Marx. Karl or Groucho. This is Karl Marx. And so I was kind of interested in this idea of owning the means of production. And I guess that's about sort of controlling things yourself and not, as designers, we, most of our sort of working lives, we rely on other people giving us work, but there's a lot of time in my life where I suddenly realised that actually it's much better to sort of make your own work really, and with letterpress that means owning the means of production. So I really like that. I think it's from Das Kapital. Anyway, good thing. And just go, a bit better look at time. So just going back to sort of controlling our own lives, which I guess is connected to survival as well. And this was, I don't know if many people know this, but this is by Ken Garland in 1964. And it was when designers were, I think he got to a point where he realised that all his work was out of his control because it just relied on people giving him work and then paying him. And he talks about toothpaste packets and things like that. And he came and did a talk at my art college in the 1970s, and it had sort of left its mark a little bit. So again, that thing of I suppose owning means production, but also owning your own work and controlling your own work, which I think is a really interesting sort of concept. And this year's 150th anniversary of the Hogarth Press, and the Hogarth Press was Virginia Woolf and her husband's press, and they started it 150 years ago. Was that 1917, something like that? And what I really liked about this was her first, you can't really read it, but it's her first letter she typeset herself. She suffered with depression, and she found that when she typeset by hand, it kind of helped her. And some of you that have done our letterpress workshops understand that when you type by hand, you kind of lose yourself in set. You know, you handle every letter. It's quite a magical thing if some of you have done it, but if you haven't, you should definitely do it. So she set up this press, and again, it was owning the means of production because she was obviously a writer. She wrote her books, she typeset her books, and she printed her books. So it's quite a thing to do that. She famously turned down James Joyce's Ulysses because it was such a big book, and I think she really didn't fancy typesetting it. But so I guess that kind of adds up to spending time on the things that you're passionate about. And even here, you know, walking into these spaces, you know that people in these workshops are really passionate about what they do. You can tell just by looking in spaces. So I was going to tell you a little bit about some journeys that I've done. This was one that I did 2009, and it came about when I was on holiday in Penzance on my bicycle, and I was kind of thinking about, we live on an island, and I was kind of 52 then. And it occurred to me that there's loads of places I've never been, and we sort of travel really easily around the world, but there's loads of places in Britain I'd never been. So I thought, well, if I travelled around the coast, I'd see a load of those places. And then I was kind of thinking, well, how long would that take, and how far is it? And I didn't know, so became a bit intrigued by it. So I thought, maybe I'll do that. And then you tell people in a pub, and once you, there's this sort of rule of the pub where you tell 3 people, and they're going, oh yeah, when are you doing that? And suddenly you're doing it. So there's a kind of tipping point. And so I kind of set off on this journey. It took me, I suppose it's kind of a journey, and again it's linked to survival, because there's this thing of spending time on your own. Like we never spend time on our own, you know. And I was thinking, I wonder how I'd get on, you know. Would I start talking to myself, which I do actually, and so there's lots of little intriguing questions about, you know, how long it would be. Anyway, it took 3.5 months, 4,600 miles, in case you're wondering, and I spent all this time on my own, and but then had this other thing where I was kind of thinking it was a bit self-indulgent to do this, and what else could I do? So I was kind of intrigued about what's possible on a bicycle, and so I thought what I would do is seek out people that made things by hand and make little films about them. I'd interview them and take pictures, and then I'd put them together in a kind of slideshow format. Doesn't sound very interesting, but I'll show you one. They're quite nice, and so that's what I did. So I set off from Bristol, which is my home, and the idea was to go clockwise around Britain. I don't know why I went clockwise. I did meet someone that was going anti-clockwise in Scotland, and I also met them in Cornwall, because you kind of do that, and so I met him twice. And he made me promise I wouldn't write a book about it, because he was writing a book. And I did end up doing a book, but it was a different kind of book from his. And so I met all these amazing makers, and I think it kind of changed my life. I think making stuff is in all of us. You know, I guess most of us here are creative, but it is in all of us. And sort of making stuff by hand is a special thing, as again, you'd know looking around these studios here. So I met people that carved lettering. This was a girl that carved lettering in the borders of Scotland, and she worked in the back of a garage, which is why there's lots of tyres and car bits there. And so I met kind of amazing people. I met tailors, I met weavers. This was a weaver in Edinburgh, potters. This was a potter in Norfolk, and this is Bill Buntoft, who makes walking sticks. I was going to show you a little sound slide of him, but I think I'll only show you one sound slide, so I might do a shorter one. But people ask me sometimes, did I pre-arrange meeting the makers? Sometimes I kind of did, because I kind of looked a few up. You know, obviously it's easy to track people down these days. But Bill, this chap, he was in a little village in Lincolnshire, actually, and he just had a little A5 bit of card on the pin to his fence. It just said stick maker, and so kind of intrigued, and I went in and met him here in his garage, and he made walking sticks and working sticks, and really lovely character actually. And I won't show you the film because it will go on too long. So so Mike, who I promised I wouldn't write a book, I did actually do this book, but they are just the conversations, and what I always found with meeting people, and I still do, that they're totally inspirational. Makers are inspirational people, and every time I met them, so I was talking about being on my own, and people you sort of met would become your best friend for that day, in a not a weird way actually, but in a nice way, and you would be inspired, and going into people's workspaces, I find astonishing. It's so ordered and tidy, and then you talk to them, and they're inspiring people. So every time I left these people, I would have this sort of huge high, and I'd be cycling away and wouldn't notice the hills, and well, I would, but the hills would be a bit easier. So I made this little book of about, I think, only 20 of the people. I ended up making about 100 little films, and then when I finished, I said, I cycle around the coast of Britain, and then someone emailed me and said, you can't say that unless you've cycled around Ireland. So I thought, so I cycled around Ireland, which was another 1,800 miles the following summer, which was really beautiful. And I set off from Belfast, cycled clockwise again, so ended up back in Belfast, and that took 5 weeks. And I made about another 30 films, and again, amazing people in Ireland. And then I carried on making these little films, and I would go to places that I suppose were kind of known for something, like Sheffield is known for steel and making cutlery, and I met these amazing old boys who made penknives. And in Sheffield there was this sort of history of makers, and they were called Little Mesters. Don't know if any of you ever heard of that, but it was very particular to Sheffield. And Little Mesters, I think Mesters stood for master, like master craftsman, I guess. And they made one thing in particular. So the big manufacturers would kind of put work out. And it's quite often to families, and they would make a particular thing. Anyway, this was a little film. You have to kind of concentrate, because the other thing about travelling around Britain is kind of accents change. Like you can travel through the West Midlands like I did a couple of weeks ago, and within like 5 miles the accent really changes. Kind of brilliant actually. And I cycled one day I cycled from Stratford-on-Avon to Northampton, and it went from this kind of slightly Midlandy accent, although they're quite posh in Stratford. So, and then you go to Northampton and it sounds like they're all Cockneys. It's really weird. And it's only like 50 miles. So anyway, I'll show you this give you an idea of what these little films are like. It's only 2 minutes long.
Trevor Ablett, I'm what's known as a common cutler, which means I make the bread and butter stuff, like lamb foots, pruners, spear points, anything like that, Nothing fancy, I just make an ordinary pocket knife, no work back or pearl or ebony or out like that. They had a cutler called Addy Rag. He took me under his wing, showed me how to make a pocket knife. Harry was one of them. If they did something wrong, he'd tell me, but if they did it right, and they went up to me and said, "Hey, what's think of this, Harry?" He'd say to them, "Oh, well, so what's the medal for doing the job right?" But he brought it back down to earth. But I owe everything to Harry Rag for what I am now. You had to take it in them days. It weren't like, you go crying because somebody shouted at you or something like that. It was part of the job. Because some old cutlers, they used to make it right difficult, as though work, it's something magic about it. But it isn't, it's common sense. I know our Reg will tell me sometimes I need a crash helmet in here, because if a job's going wrong, I get a crack scale, I'll just sling the bugger across the office. So don't, Reg, because I get so frustrated that, we like them two old men in Muppets up in the gallery here. When we sit down at 9 o'clock, we put world to rights, and then we're back to work.
So I love seeing that, and he was I think he was about 70 then, and he put the little sign on the door on the way out, Trevor keys, because he'd forget his keys otherwise, so it's to remind him. And one of the common things about meeting kind of makers is that they often talk about the people they learnt from, and he did then, and that's really common. So, if you were an apprentice, you talk about the person that you were apprenticed to. The other thing is always kind of say, a lot of makers say, "Oh, anyone could do what I do." And of course, it's because they've done it, they've done their 10,000 hours and they've done their years. And so, of course, it's really easy to them. But that's another common thing with sort of craftsmen and women, really. and then sort of a bit more recently, so one of the kind of things that came out of that was me sort of doing less graphic design and getting into the letterpress thing, and I think that was an influence of meeting kind of makers and doing things more sort of slowly. And the other thing was in Bristol, it was a really big print letterpress place for up until about 50 years ago, and nobody was doing letterpress, and there were these kind of machines that were being melted down. So I thought, oh, someone's got to save those machines, and that might as well be me. So then I kind of thought, well, what do I do with them? So where do I put them? So those things. So it was all a bit accidental, but those things came together to kind of form the Letterpress Collective, where people can come and learn how to use these amazing sort of Victorian machines, which are pretty mad, and also the type is really beautiful, because I love that idea that you can hold a bit of wood type and you've got no idea how many times it's been used. You know, it might have been used 200 times, and what are all the words that it's made, you know. So you've got this kind of legacy of stuff that you're handling. Anyway, this is our little coffee shop just around the corner, and that's me and Robin. Robin makes bicycles, so we sort of sit there, talk about bicycles and stuff we do. And we had this kind of, it came around this thing of, I wonder if we could put our sort of things together. So could he make a bicycle that you could put a printing press on? And Robin likes a challenge. So and the other thing, I was a bit influenced by the old knife grinders who would cycle. My friend Callie showed me a film of a knife grinder who would travel from Scotland to Cornwall every year, and he would go through villages, and the villagers would sort of know that he would appear, you know, in March, and they'd pay him and feed him, and he'd carry everything on his bike. So, like I said, I think before, that I've always been a bit intrigued by what's possible on a bicycle. So that became a sort of bit of a thing with the printing bike, and Robin started making this bike, which was basically a cargo bike, but he had some really nice ideas. So he had this idea of using BMX 20-inch wheels, which would make the bike much, because most cargo bikes are really long, you can't, you know, get them in trains and stuff like that. So he made a bike that was only about 2 inches longer than a normal bike, and this was it. And it ended up looking like that. And you can't see the press because it's covered up in this picture. I think it looks like you should have a parrot in there or something, but anyway, there's printing press in there. And then all the inks and paper go on the front, and I can put 2 little panniers on the back. And then kind of what to do with it, really. So we did a crowdfunding project where we raised money to one of the things about cycling around Britain was that I kind of raised money for Parkinson's disease, and I came back and I was really broke, and then I got a tax bill and I was even more broke, and so I thought, oh, I can't do that again, because I'll be like, I won't survive. I'll be like the opposite of survival. So so I did this Kickstarter, which funded, and the reward was to get a postcard, because I was kind of thinking, oh, postcards are really lovely, and people don't get postcards, and we could print postcards on our little Adama press, which was on the bike. So that was the kind of idea, and that's a little chase. The chase is the thing that you lock the type up in, and it's all hand set. That was the reverse of the postcard. And so we set off on this journey, and the journey was from Bristol to Mainz, and Mainz was where Gutenberg invented printing with movable type in 1450. And so we thought, oh, we'll go to Mainz because that means we can go across France, and France is really great to cycle across. And then I got friends to cut linos and to set bits of type, so I would print these pieces. We would stop every night or every other night. Well, we stopped every night, but we print every other night, and then we print them and dry them, and in the morning we'd post them from wherever we were. So we did that, and It was really great and worked really nicely, and that's me printing in a field in France. That's the little Adana press, little hand press. That's me as well. The Adana press is, people call it a hobby press, and the old letterpress printers sort of kind of laugh at it a little bit because they say, oh, it's not a proper printing press. But I've become really fond of that little press, and you get to know all its sort of quirks and stuff. So that's France. That's what cycling looks like around Paris. These sort of massive, like 100-acre fields, and you just cycle into distance. And someone sent me a poem. Tara Lemmy, who's an American lady, sort of said, "Oh, I've written this poem for you." So we set it, planting 12-point type, and that was one of the last things I printed. So quite often, and it's kind of interesting because you would, when you're in your studio, you have all these kind of nice tables and things, but when you're out with your bicycle, you end up drying stuff on the floor in, I don't know, on cobbles and things like that. And then we'd send them. We ended up printing about 12 postcards, and then when we got back, I hadn't really thought about what would happen to the bike, but it had this kind of second life of going to, art events and festivals, and you could ride it to places. So it kind of worked out really nicely. So we'd take it to. This was a little art project. At the island, which is just around the corner from us, and that's Ellen with her back to us, and Ellen works with me in the letterpress. She's a really brilliant printer, and then because we own the means of production, we were able to do our own little book, and we printed a book of all the postcards. I've got a couple here if anyone wants to look at them after, and that's what the pages look like. So we would show it's a lino cut by Hannah Cousins, and Hannah came and met us in Paris. She got the Eurostar, and we met her, and she cut the lino while we were sort of drinking beer, and then she drank beer while we printed it, and then she went home. And so the can't work out. So the left-hand page kind of says where we were and how far we cycled that day, because we had a little GPS, and the right-hand page was her lino. And then sort of a couple of years passed, and the little printing bike sort of sat there, and I was thinking, it's got another journey in it, and I kind of felt like, I don't know, I just kind of thought there was something else, and so I started. And this is a really nice thing to do, and you probably all do it anyway, but sometimes I kind of set a little idea in my head and then leave it for a year and see if it still sounds good. So I thought, well, maybe I could do a Land's End to John O'Groats, which I've never done, but on the printing bike, which I think could be world first, but I don't know. Hoping it would be. Who knows? So that was the idea. And then I kind of thought again, what could I do? And I became a bit intrigued, like the Reg and Trevor in Sheffield. I thought, well, maybe I could link up all those little towns that are known for one thing in particular and see how that kind of worked with the Land's End to John O'Groats. So it ended up being a kind of zigzag journey. Like I said, Stratford to Northampton isn't really your normal Land's End to John O'Groats route. So I kind of left that idea for a year or so, and anyway, this year I did it. So I finished last Tuesday, and it was really brilliant. And I did that on my own because although it was really nice, I did cycle to Mainz with Robin actually, because Robin sort of said, "Can I come as well?" And he built his own bike in the week between finishing the print bike and us heading off, and. But this one I did on my own again, and this was somewhere maybe in Scotland, I think, and it's really beautiful, and we live in this amazing, beautiful country, and we see so little of it, like, you could spend all your life travelling and you still wouldn't see all of it, and I went to all the places that are known for one thing in particular. So this is the Outer Hebrides, and I know through kind of meeting a lot of makers, I was able to kind of revisit some of them. And this is a friend, Ian, who has a weaving studio, I don't know, weaving business in the north of Lewis, and Harris and Lewis are known for tweed, so he makes tweed on hand looms, which is quite unusual and time consuming. And this is the print. So I thought I'd show you some of the places where the printing bike went in the last 5 weeks actually. So this is in the Outer Hebrides, in the north of Lewis, and this is a still in Somerset, and they make cider brandy, and it's the same place that makes all the cider for Glastonbury, Borough Hill, so Ellen came with me on the first week. She came with, so that's Ellen again, and she came with me on that sort of first leg in the Land's End to Bristol, and then she stayed there to keep doing the workshops, and I carried on. And this is my friends David and Claire, who I think, and David has done one of these talks. That's the Jeans Factory in Cardigan, and Shoe Factory in Northampton. One of the nice things about these places, quite often, if you're kind of thinking, oh, how do you find all those places? If you look at the nicknames of football teams, quite often they're give you a clue. So Northampton Town are the Cobblers, and Yeovil Town are the Glovers, Walsall are the Saddlers. What else? Anyone think of Sheffield? Sheffield United? Are they Cutler? No. What are they? The Blades. That's right. So quite often you get a clue, and this is Brooks Saddles factory in Smethwick in the West Midlands, just near Walsall, and so I printed there. And this was a pub in Hebden Bridge. So Hebden Bridge is used to be known as Trouser Town, and I thought, I've got to go to Trouser Town. Why wouldn't you go to Trouser Town? So, and there's a company called Hebtro Co, who are making trousers in Hebden Bridge again. And we met in the pub, and I printed in the pub, and I think he uses the pub as his office, which is, I have to say, is a little bit worrying actually. But anyway, and then so I kind of thought, I could go through Stratford, and Stratford is known for Shakespeare. So I went and printed outside the Royal Shakespeare Company on the pavement, which was kind of quite nice as well. And so I printed some cards. I met the director of Titus Andronicus, and so my friend Luke cut a little lino of a face of Titus, which is quite nice. And I did the same thing, printed postcards, and also crowdfunded that project. Crowdfunding is pretty neat actually, if it works. And this was the card that I cut for Jane Renfield, cut a lino for Hyatt Denham, and that was Hannah Cousins' lino for the shoe company, Grensons, who are in Rushden actually, just outside of Northampton. And this is turning into talk about postcards, which you weren't expecting probably. So this is me at Land's End, and I look all kind of shiny and clean. And then I had 3 days of rain, which you never get as a cyclist. You never get you get like the odd day of rain or a couple of hours, but we had 3 days of rain, and 3 days later I look like that, a bit less shiny. And I had to hose everything down. And so it kind of brings me back to the letterpress, and that's I suppose that's kind of my day job really. And what else I've got? So yeah, so we run workshops and we print stuff. And what I've kind of found I've started doing, because as a graphic designer, is that I start printing. I kind of look for excuses to print letterpress. So I do a yearbook for David, the jeans company, and I've kind of found a way of combining kind of lithography with little, and I sneak letterpress sections in, and don't tell him. And well, I did tell him actually, but it's so we did the sort of cover, so yeah, so it's kind of becomes a bit ingrained really, and you look for excuses to do letterpress, and we do. I think I've put a few little examples. Oh yeah, so we do a festival. We do a print festival, and where we are, we have a space. Our letterpress studio is next to a communal space, so we're in a building, a cooperative building, and we have a kind of space next to us, and we also have a gallery. And when I moved there, I thought, we've got to do something. So we do a print festival each year. And I don't know if you know Bristol very well, but Bristol's one of these places that has really irritating festivals, and they're kind of uplifting festivals. So last year and they can be quite irritating, like. So we thought we'd do a festival of apathy, which was a bit of a downer festival, and it was brilliant. And so if no one turns up, you can say, yeah, that's great, because that's apathy at its best. Don't turn up. So we did the Festival of Apathy, and we kind of printed around it. And Griff Rees, who's a native of this town, I think, came along and played, and it was just before the referendum. So he sang his song about staying in the EU, and so it was kind of mixture of print and talking and music, and oh yeah, so we did Broadmead is this like really down shopping centre in Bristol. It was built in the 1950s, and I think it's going to be knocked down. So we thought, we'll make a movie about Broadmead, which would be really good for apathy. And so Stanley Donwood, who is an artist who lives in Bath, and Matt, two friends, made a movie and about Broadmead, which was really long. And again, Stan was saying, it'd be great if people just walk out. We'll make it. It'd be really apathetic. And so we were trying to see how many people. He decided to make it as long as he could, so as many people as possible would leave. And then we made quite a boring book about it as well. And again, that's the kind of thing you can do. Like, nobody would commission you to make a film about Broadmead or write a book about Broadmead, but owning the means of production means you can do things like that. And then friends, we do kind of little residencies during the festival, and this is a friend of mine who's a lino cutter French fellow who lives in Madrid, called Olaf Ladouce. And he came and made this little comic book during the week of the festival, and we get to do kind of nice things. This is a poster. We have this DJ Derek who went missing, and then they found not in a good way. He died. And but we made a poster which was to do a tribute war to DJ Derek in Bristol, and he would go to the Oxfam shop and get waistcoats, and they were always quite decorative. So we did use sort of decorative borders to make the waistcoats, and the other thing we were able to do is to kind of sort of. I suppose there are things I don't know if what might happen in Cardiff, but there was a place called Queen Square in the middle of Bristol, and there was this massive riot, and I suppose it comes back to Marx a little bit, in the 1830s, where the local, it was to do with universal suffrage and everyone having the vote, and there was a riot, and 300 people died, and it's kind of like brushed under the carpet. Nobody really, there's nothing nothing to kind of talk about, you know, and we have these kind of statues of, I don't know, kings or Queen Victoria, but there's nothing about the things that really mattered and changed things. So we printed this big metre-long poster about the Queen Square riot, and again, stuff you can do. This is the some spreads from the little jeans book I showed you, and this is a map of the old city. So I thought it would be interesting to look at the crafts that would have happened in the city, and we did it's quite big. I brought a couple along, and this was printed at my friend. It's too big for our press, but we printed. It doesn't look that big actually, but I guess it's A2-ish. Bit bigger than A2. Anyway, it's a kind of map of where we are in the old city, and it talks about the crafts. And it's one of the nice things about letterpress is there's this little community, and there's not many of us. There's maybe 20 or 30 around the country, maybe a few more. But we kind of meet up, and people you get to know, and they're really nice people. So this was printed at the Whittington Press by my friend Pat Randall, and it was set on a monotype caster, which is a kind of automated casting machine, casts individual bits of lead type. Yeah, so I kind of, my talk peters out. Always, why does it do that? It's kind of, yeah, it's time. Oh yeah, it's time. So that's that, and that's a little drawing of our letterpress studio. So I don't know if that's about survival, but it's about the kind of things that you can do for your own survival in a way, and how you can sort of control. I mean, I did it just because I got to a certain age where I kind of thought, geez, I'm doing all this stuff for other people, better do something for myself. And you know, so maybe you can do it a bit younger than I did it, but I think we should all do it. That's kind of it, really. Thank you.